But of course, we begin with our big story here, that expected release of dozens more hostages from Hamas. Israeli officials are now saying they do not expect that release to begin before Friday. This as IDF forces are still moving forward in Gaza. ABC News national security and defense analyst and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, Mick Mulroy, is joining us now for more on this. So, Mick, thank you for being here. First of all, we know that the IDF is still moving forward in Gaza, and they're urging just today, in fact, Mick, for residents of Gaza City to evacuate immediately. They want them to go to the humanitarian zone. So how does that interaction play as they're still ready to perhaps, switch these hostages?
So, Kana, it's not unusual for a spur and activity to happen right before a truce, where both sides try to get in the best position they can before they have to come to ground at strong point, while the truce happens. And then once it starts again, they're ready to go. And that is what a truce is. It presumes that fighting will start again. And that's an important point. The Arabic word was used for that. And that means they all expect this to start again. But it's not unusual for them to try to get some kind of advantage right before they go into this truce. And I also think they're trying to get civilians out because they need that to happen, because once it starts again, the fighting will be just as intense as it was before it stopped.
Yeah, and Mick, in fact, multiple Israeli officials are saying flat out at this point they intend to continue the war in Gaza, and they intend for complete elimination of Hamas. They're not being secretive about their plans at all. But we also saw Matt Gutman. He was with the IDF, and he went to the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza and went to those tunnels underneath. And clearly, Hamas is operating in at least some capacity in these tunnels. But Mick, do you think that what we're seeing here falls short of proof that there's actually a command center there, as the IDF claims?
So it is important to point, command centers are different nowadays. Communications technology has gotten so small that we used to take large radios when I was a young private in the Marine Corps. It's now, all that technology is in something the size of a phone. So it's easy to pick up radios, communications devices, laptops, all the stuff that a command and control node would need, and depart. So I do think that doesn't necessarily prove that it was a command and control node, but it certainly doesn't disprove it. It's easy to move, and especially in these type of malicious/terrorist organizations, the command and control node is generally very small and very agile because they're targeted all the time.
Interesting. And it is, again, fortified infrastructure underneath there as well. I mean, you saw bathrooms and tile and everything. Also, Israel's national security advisor is now saying that this hostage release will not take place before Friday. But this truce is supposed to go into effect 10 a.m. local time tomorrow. So logistically, how do you think it will play out amid so much distrust between both sides?
So not much has been talked about the logistics of this. It is complicated. So for every one hostage that comes out, there's three Palestinian prisoners that are going in. So there's going to be a lot of trust that has to happen here on how that exchange works. And there's not a lot of trust between the parties. So perhaps that's the reason for this delay. But I do think it's still on track by everybody's statements. It is clear it's still considered to be on track. And that's really important because all these hostages, the first 50, of course, but all of them need to come out as soon as possible.
In fact, Mick, we just got information here from a senior Israeli official who says to ABC the deal is not in danger of falling apart right now, does reiterate that the ceasefire, they're now saying the ceasefire won't start until Friday either, but also no hostages are expected to be released until Friday as well. So it seems like they're moving back this ceasefire or this truce, if you will, at least by a few hours, but reiterating the deal's not in danger of falling apart. What do you make of that?
So, Kane, I think it's exactly what you just said. I think they're tethered together. So the ceasefire happens, or I should say the truth, the cease in hostilities happens when the hostages start coming out. So that is why I think once they moved one back to Friday, they moved the other back to Friday. So that is consistent with the actual agreement and the agreement that was agreed to by the Israeli government. So I could see why they do that together. So they'll probably be fighting up until the actual time that both start happening.
It's just an unimaginable reality. Mick, thank you so much. So let's now take this to our panel. So stay with us here. I want to bring this big story to our panel. Joining us today is our ABC News contributor and Sirius XM radio host, Mike Muse, along with ABC News contributor and LA Times op-ed columnist LZ Granderson, ABC News National Defense Secretary and analyst Mick Mulroy as well. Thank you for remaining with us. And our senior White House correspondent, Selena Wang, who is in Nantucket, Massachusetts, traveling with the president. And it looks very festive there behind you, Selena. We're so glad to have you. And let's start with you. We know the president spoke with Benjamin Netanyahu and the leader of Qatar about the deal earlier today. Of course, Qatar has been an intermediary in all of this. What can you tell us about these calls?
Yeah, Kana, as you mentioned, I'm here in Nantucket where the president is for his Thanksgiving holiday, but he hasn't been resting, still working the phone, speaking to all those regional leaders you mentioned. And the purpose of this call was to express gratitude and thanks for working around the clock on securing this deal, but also the White House saying that the president is going to stay in close contact with these leaders to ensure that this deal is carried through. The White House has been very cautious that this deal is not done until it's done. They want to ensure this gets carried through all the way. And senior administration officials have been telling me that the president has been very hands-on throughout this process, and that in the early stages of this conflict, a small group of top Biden aides formed a secret cell that would communicate with the Israeli and Qatar counterparts on this hostage negotiation release. And they described it as a weeks-long, painstaking, excruciating process. We saw those 2 Americans get released last month. These officials described that as a test run to ensure that this secret cell could actually deliver. And from there, the Biden administration worked with their counterparts to secure this larger hostage release deal. But it was difficult. At times, talks stalled. And at one point, Hamas even stopped talking altogether. U.S. officials saying that President Biden's personal diplomacy was key to getting through to this point. But look, there are 10 Americans that are unaccounted for. It's expected that 3 Americans will be released in this first batch, including that 3-year-old girl whose parents were killed by Hamas. But there are still many other hostages that are still being held. The White House says they are determined and will not stop working on getting all of these hostages released. Kana.
All right, and Selena, as we know, the little 3-year-old girl, her 4th birthday is on Friday. Mick, as we go to you, an Israeli source is telling ABC News that 30 children will be released as part of this, but we know that up to 40 children are being held. And as Selena pointed out, it appears there's 10 missing hostages, but Hamas keeps saying they don't know where these 10 remaining children are. Is this part of the flexibility in this deal, though, that could potentially, let this truce last longer? They could get more people out? Or what is it that we don't know about these 10 missing kids?
So, Kana, we don't know, but it is possible they're using it as what you just mentioned, so they could have an opportunity to drag this out. But it's also possible they actually don't know. There's a lot of reporting that they don't know which hostages are still alive, which are not, who has which hostages. Some specific groups went out and took the opportunity to grab individuals for ransom and are not with Hamas. So it's a very confusing situation. And I think that's what's caused these negotiations to last so long, because it's really unclear just what Hamas can produce. And I think they're only going to provide the names the day before of the hostages that are coming out the next day. So that shows you just how tense these discussions are.
Right, keeping a close eye on that list. And Mike, to you, a lot of people believe that essentially Hamas is winning the information war here. You see the IDF trying to prove their suspicions about how Hamas operated in these tunnels. How do you think the American people are seeing that?
Yeah, this is a really difficult question because there's just so much nuance that goes into this. We're in the era for the first time we're at war, and the technology and social media is more advanced than ever. We have more platforms than ever before, so people have more of a platform. And so you actually see information and opinions getting ahead of diplomacy. You actually see information and hashtags getting ahead of actual fact base. And what you also too see getting ahead of any debrief that could come from any official in the United States or any Israelis or United Nations is you see the images being spread on social media of the children and women and elders who are injured in Gaza. So the pictures are winning the argument, and then there's just not enough nuance in order to discuss about the denouncing of Hamas having compassion for the Palestinian people in Gaza, with also to the understanding that Israel has a right to defend itself. So because we're missing that nuance, the images are going forward. And because most Americans in particular don't have time to do a deep dive into the moments, what they see is that the IDF engaged in attacks on a hospital. They may not have gotten the part B of that, was that Hamas was using that hospital as a command center. At that moment, because so much is going ahead of it, it's already embedded in a lot of Americans' mind that damage is being done to innocent children who are in hospitals. And so it's more so pictures and images are getting ahead of it. And as people's frustration on the historical aspects of Palestine, they are also too missing out on the moment to denounce Hamas. And so as a result of that, that is what makes this so complicated and nuanced of a question.
Right. And of course, here at ABC, we work very hard to verify any video that we use, facts that we use, of course, as well as the death toll. And that's just not the case on social media. And that is how a lot of Americans are viewing this war, through, social media on their screens. And LZ, Matt Gutman, as you saw, interviewed Israel's chief military spokesperson. And when pressed about the deaths of thousands of Palestinians, he said to Matt that Israel's not fighting against the Gaza civilians and that they have no other alternative. They said, we're going to defeat Hamas. So what is your reaction to that, as we're seeing firsthand so much destruction of Gaza?
It's heartbreaking. But this is what war is. And, I'm not trying to be cavalier about it, but this is why it's so important that diplomacy is tried and tried again, because war is awful. We just passed, 10,000 civilians dying in the Ukraine. We had more than 45,000 Afghan civilians died during our war of those 2 decades. It's awful. And so my reaction to the reporting that Matt did is my reaction to all war, that civilians are going to die and that war brings quiet, but it doesn't ever bring peace.
Right. Right. And it's so important for us to have our eyes on the ground there, and we're able to see the things that Matt saw, and we're working to verify all these claims, and we will continue to do that because it is so important. Mike, LZ, Mick, and Selena, thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.